Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me, John. And yes, I would say that the builds have been pretty strong. But keep in mind, last year the phone was released a month later, and obviously, along with the COVID supply chain challenges, even though the phone was released in October, by the time in China people got their hands on it, it was already November. So you definitely had a month or so of loss last year that you don't have this year. So clearly, numbers are looking pretty good. And for what it's worth, just an hour and a half ago, I got my new iPhone 13 Pro Max, so it's still downloading from the iCloud.
Do you have a sense of how much of the build is toward the high end versus the lower end of the range? I mean, it seems like that there are longer wait times for the high-end phones, which is good if they built a lot of high-end phones, but maybe if they're having trouble with components on the high end or they didn't build as many, it means something different.
Yeah, I think it's too early to figure that out, but I would say it definitely does skew more towards historically has been more on the pro side versus the regular. So I think that seems to be the trend so far, and so I would say kind of that's where it is. But keep in mind the overall securing of components for the iPhone in general has been better than Apple's other products like the iPad and the MacBook, etc. So it definitely seems like in general the component tightness is actually the better situation for the iPhone. And within that, I would probably say it does skew more towards the iPhone Pro at this point, but I think it's still too early to make that call.
And Krish, I know it is early, but at this early stage, where do you think the basket of opportunity is deeper, in Apple itself or in the component makers?
That's actually a really good question. I mean, I guess it really depends on how you're going to look at it, right? Obviously, if you're like a large cap, mega cap, I would probably say, I still like Apple is a good way to play it. The one thing I would keep in mind is, I think to your point, Carl, historically, if you look at the trend of Apple, typically the stock does run into the iPhone release. So like the few months before that is a strong period. And right after the iPhone release, typically in calendar Q4, is a seasonally slow period for the stock. Even though it's seasonally the strongest quarter for the company, it is actually the opposite for the stock. So I think from the point, if you're trying to do like a short-term positioning, you're probably better off on the supply chain. But I think longer term, I think Apple is still a great story. But keep in mind just the seasonality in terms of positioning always does skew away from Apple post the phone release.
Krish, just to follow on Carl's question, though, looking at the broader ecosystem, what is your outlook now on some of those component makers, and how are those stocks going to be impacted from some of the trends you're seeing in the data?
Sure. So as of now, I would say if you look at the overall smartphone supply chain, where you're seeing the one place where the strength has been very strong and consistent is the iPhone, right? We did see like some movement in OVX, the Oppo, Vivo, Xiaomi, Samsung, and then you just begin to see some of like Huawei tail off and Honor start picking up some of the slack in China. So you've seen some movement on the OVX Samsung side, but Apple has been pretty consistent. So with that respect, I'd say anyone levered to the Apple supply chain is still probably going to do well. But keep in mind, seasonality does play into effect. Calendar Q1 is seasonally slow for Apple and also the supply chain. But in general, I would say anyone levered to the Apple supply chain should do well, especially given the fact that the numbers have been consistently strong, not just globally, but also in China and the US.